Well, cool. I'm going to kick things off. Thank you, everybody. I am recording this so that we can share the video for people who are interested in hearing about the first 2 years of Agitare. I considered doing the Pechacucha that I did 2 years ago for Cawcast, which was when I kicked off Agitare as an official thing. I went on and I did a Pechacucha, which is a format of presentation, if you're not familiar. And I told them about this community that at the time I said existed, but it didn't really exist. It was a Google site that Jerry McCoy had helped me throw together. And it was hosted by DEF, the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum. And it included an email sign up. And I was like, there's this community of practice for people who are lone facilitators, who are trying to bring human-centered design and design thinking practices to the Air Force and the DoD. And being a lone practitioner in this environment is unsustainable. It is too challenging to just continually face people who are fighting against your best efforts to convene people and have them make sense of complexity together in a collaborative way. It is too challenging to just be a lone practitioner in this environment. And so what we need is a community of people to support us, to help us in our planning efforts, to jump in and participate as co-facilitators, to just offer moral support, and then to be there to talk about what happened after the session when things went either really well or really badly, or usually a combination of both, right? There's a lot of emotional, there's always a lot of emotional journey for every single workshop that I do. There are real low points of the preparation and execution and after process. For me personally, that's just my experience. I really get into it. It's actually really similar to writing for me. I get into it and I go and I hit these really low points because I'm investing myself really heavily emotionally into figuring out what the best things to do are. And there's a lot of fear. And the only cure that I've found for that is to have people around to help shoulder some of that and to kind of fill your cup when it's empty, and they shoulder some of that and they're like, oh, here, I'll take this part of it. And some of it is just validation, is to go, no, actually that plan's spot on. I think that's actually going to go well, or here's something similar that I did. And so that's why we started Agitare, was to create a space that was away from the people that we were trying to facilitate for, that was safe for us as practitioners to grow and to have conversations about what had happened or what was going to happen. And it is effectively a community of practice. And I'd argue that in a lot of places, especially in the Air Force that I've seen, what people call a community of practice is not a community of practice. It's somewhere where like two people are just pushing content. If the community is not engaging, if you're not having a conversation, if there's not, collective growth and conflict and, those the navigating the landscape together happening, then what you have is not a community of practice. It might be valuable, but Agitare is the first community of practice I've ever belonged to in my now 16 years in the Air Force. And it boggles my mind that this doesn't exist for other communities. Like, I was a linguist for, I've been a unit deployment manager. I've done a lot of jobs in the Air Force, and I never had a group of people to lean on. There were the people in my immediate vicinity. If they happened to be supportive and helpful, that was cool. If I had leaders who were supportive and helpful, that was helpful. But I never had that sense of here are people who are going on the same journey with me. And in some ways they're ahead of me, in some ways they're behind me, but we're just kind of, we're on this mountain together, and we're tied together with ropes so that if one of us falls, we're not going to plummet to our deaths. And that's the sense that I get with Agitare, is that I'm with a large group of people, and the number varies, right? Because people have more or less energy to be in the community, and that's fine. That's just the way it works. It's an organic thing. But for the last 2 years, I have not once had the sensation that I had repeatedly before Agitare existed, which was, I'm all by myself and nobody's supporting me, and I'm just fighting this battle alone. I'm just trying to change hearts and minds as a one-man, military, and it was unsustainable. I've gone 2 years now where I always have a place to kind of return to. I have a tribe, a clan of people who are going to help. They're going to respond to the things that I'm putting out there, give me a gut check on whether I'm being crazy or inaccessible. They help me hone my thoughts. So I have accidentally, stumbled across. When I said that Agitare existed, I said it was a support group for Daniel. That's what I was launching, because I just needed some people to help me keep going. And incidentally, I think that we've created kind of a support group for a large number of people. And one thing I want to talk about today is the impact that this community is having, because there were like a couple of layers to it. I wanted to support people who were trying to be practitioners so that they could grow. As a result of those people being empowered, those community members being empowered to practice and to grow and to experiment, and us generating stories and pushing them out and generating content and putting it on YouTube, all of these things, you can create these feedback loops to amplify and win over more hearts and minds, because we're a collective, right? A bunch of people pushing this message, and a bunch of dim lights together actually create a much brighter signal. Because light's weird like that, it amplifies. And as a result, we've actually had a weird amount of influence over a lot of people who are not in the community, which was one of the goals that I wanted for this, was to actually influence people. And we are influencing people. We are absolutely reaching the eyes and ears of senior leaders. The fact that the Air Force Enlisted Force Development Action Plan includes teaching design thinking, human-centered design methods to Air Force leaders, I think that Agitare played a significant part in that. And that might be hubristic, but it's kind of my impression of this community, is that it has significantly amplified the message that these facilitated practices are necessary for the acceleration of change and for innovation. And we've really won a lot of people over. We've given them a ton of opportunities to just learn a little bit, to jump into an event or see a recording of, an event that we did. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of things really quick, and then I'm going to open it up so that other people can speak. Let me find my notes board. Where is my notes board? It closed. Miro crashed last night and I almost died. It was really scary for me. So what's happened in the last 2 years? One thing that's happened is we rolled into this really kind of structured form of leadership in the Agitare community. We had this really rigid sense of who was in the leadership team, and we met regularly, and we planned things, and we talked about our intent. We came up with strategies, and that was really useful at the outset. At a certain point, I think it was as people started to get pulled back to their workspaces that less of their energy was available, less of their time was available. And so it stopped kind of making sense to demand that we were meeting regularly. So the institutional form was taken down. I'd argue it was more of a scaffold. It was a scaffold that we put up. We built the community around that scaffold. and we took the scaffold down. That's how construction works, right? And because it's an organic community and it's constantly in flux and things happen as people have appetite and energy available to make things happen, it shrinks at times. And there have been periods where it was like, oh, this Slack's really quiet right now. I wonder what everybody's doing at the moment. And then it'll blow up, right? And it's usually in response to somebody from the community going, hey, I kind of want to do this event. It fits into our plan. You know, we did the Overcoming Bureaucracy event, which was pretty enormous. It had large ripple effect. It influenced a lot of people. And it was just like, I've told a couple of people this, my policy for what I'll support within the Agitare community, because I have a lot of ideas and I'm like, oh, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do this. I no longer do things where I don't have an active collaborator on it. So the second somebody's like, hey, you mentioned wanting to do that thing. Do you want to, can I help you with that? And I'm like, now we're doing it because I have a collaborator. So the Defense Innovation Ecosystem Mapping project was that way, where I was like, I've been thinking about this ecosystem mapping thing. I did that for a couple of weeks or months, and then somebody kind of bit, and they were like, I want to do this. I think it was Lauren and Barry were like, let's do it. And I was like, oh, now I have people to meet with and we can map out what this is going to look like. And we made an event and it was huge. It was great. I loved it. It was a really good time. And I generated a lot of content from that. Overcoming Bureaucracy was the same way. Cuss has been churning out fish bowls like a monster. 9 fish bowls now, which is just amazing. We have 1.5 thousand views on our YouTube, on the Agitare YouTube. 1.5 thousand people have watched those videos, which is significant, right? And they range. It's like approaching the same topic from a number of different angles to try and give people on-ramps to it. So that tells me that, you know, we're doing amazing things. That YouTube channel started with me just doing interviews with some of my favorite educators. The number one most viewed one is just a conversation I had with Nate Schwagler and Dr. Zwiebelson back in 2020. And then Karen Hold's event and Toga's event are just going crazy, which is like we're still getting significant traction, the newest videos and the oldest videos, right? That's a good sign that this isn't just, oh, we peaked and now we're kind of just churning out content. I see signs that you know, we are regularly producing content that people feel like is valuable and relevant to what they want, and educational, right? So those are the main things that I wanted to highlight. The fact that we are almost purely organic and that anybody within the Agitare community can basically make something happen. If they want an event to happen, we have the structure to just spin things up and run it. And there are now competent individuals across the community who can make that happen in a thoughtful and well-designed way. And then we can generate artifacts to reach more people, which is really similar to how DEF works in my eyes. It's like this superstructure that can spin up scaffolding for something to happen in you know, at short notice, and then the scaffolding comes down, and we just keep churning. Now we're doing the work. We're just doing our own facilitation. We're having conversations on Slack. A lot of people find Slack overwhelming, which to me is a good sign, because that means that we are active enough that you actually have to be paying attention in order to keep up with it. So those are all the things I wanted to say. I want to say thank you to everybody who has made this successful, because like, you know, like I said, I throw a lot of ideas out there. I now recognize that none of them are going to succeed unless I have other people holding my hand who are lashed to me on the mountainside. And there in this community, I feel like I have dozens of people who are heavily invested, who are actively engaged, who are sharing their stories, um, and that's the minimum for participation for me. Is just, are you in the conversation? And there's a ton of people in the conversation now. So that's it. That's all. I'm going to stop ranting now, because everybody's heard enough from me. I do want to open it up to whoever wanted to say something about the first 2 years of Agitare, impressions about where we started, what's happened, and where we're going. So if you don't start speaking, I'm just going to start calling on people.
I'll go. No, first, I just want to say thanks to all of y'all for, Dan, of course, having the bandwidth and the, that feeling of being alone, I think is something that in this community, is what drew me to it. It's kind of the same thing I felt when I found DEF. And you're like, wow, I'm not alone anymore. I have these people that are talking similar, they're using similar terminology. There's, they're thinking differently. They're seeing things that I see that is maybe causing friction in my organization. And so I just felt, my efforts, alone, now having this tribe, really changed the game for me. And you talk about how it's kind of a support system, and it really has. It's been a support system for me, especially when I joined, I was out in Spain, and so one person supporting a large organization that's detached into many organizations. A lot of my work was just alone, and so I agree. I think that the past 2 years has been kind of this. Finding lone soldiers out there, and I've connected more with the intelligence community. I mean, I'm somebody that was raised up in the Air Force aircraft maintenance environment, which, if you're not familiar with that environment, it can be pretty, for the Air Force anyway, it's like a little bit of the grunts, which I love, but at the same time, there's kind of a friction of mentality there. There's kind of a one mindset. And so once I found Agitare and, was able to contribute, it really helped expand my mind. And now I think it's great to be a part of it, especially now, I think for over 1.5 years now, and now hosting the Fishbowl. It's kind of like me trying to pay back a little bit, because I do feel like I've been given so much from this community, and the things that I've been able to contribute to, and the people I've been able to meet. And Jody, the Fishbowl's on our YouTube. You got to check it out. But this is I'll give an example of why Agitare is great. And just like Daniel was saying, like, you could start a project and it just kind of. So Chris had back in the day put a Fishbowl document in our Slack group, and I read through the document, and I read it one way, and somebody interpreted it maybe the other way, and then we started this event called the Fishbowl. And basically, what it is, it's like you have in academia. I think it's more applicable to academia, where you have a professor or somebody an expert on a topic, and you have this kind of closed conversation in a public forum. And you can host it a couple of different ways, but it's usually a circular room, and then there's 2 seats in the middle, and there's maybe like a 3rd seat that's open. And so you can have, if somebody in the audience wants to contribute, ask a question, or even is educated on the topic and wants to contribute, it's symbolic. That empty seat is symbolic of inviting somebody into that conversation. But it just gives a framework for hosting a very content-rich conversation for a community that wants to listen and learn. And so we decided that we wanted to do that, because there was this other methodology that kind of I had brought to the team, of Agitare being this house, this structure. And Dan, I mean, I always want to come back to it, and I hope that we do. Maybe that'll be one of the things, the efforts this year that I can help focus on.
I love the house.
The house is amazing. I think about it all the time.
But it was this idea I came up with, like, okay, if Agitare was a house, where would we have, our artifacts? And it was inspired by Dan. I think you have a Miro board that's called the kitchen, and it's basically like all the different resources, frameworks, tools that you could use. So say when you're approaching a facilitation and you want to start to like put the mechanics together, you have like all these ingredients in one place, and you kind of mix them around and play with them and decide kind of what you want your end result to be. And so that kind of sparked an idea in my head where it was like, okay, well, what are the other components of the Agitare house, and what happens in the bedroom, and what happens in the front porch, in the backyard, and what happens in the living room, and is it a 3x2, and do we have a library? And so it just expanded. And so the fishbowl, I would say, is kind of like that front porch, open to the community, bring your lawn chair, dim lighting, nothing is too, and it expands too. It's with every now we've invited some guest speakers in. And so usually what happens is I approach somebody and I'll say, hey, I'd like you to be a part of the fishbowl. And then, but depending on what information they want to bring to the community, we kind of formulate a fishbowl out of that. So we've had closed fishbowls where it's just the presenter talking. We've had open fishbowls where, Michael will kind of manage the questions and insert those in at appropriate times. And then we've had ones where we do breakout sessions that have been really beneficial too. So, and like I said, and that all comes down to, it was just a quick conversation that happened in the chat on the Slack group. And then now it's turned into 9 fishbowls. And, I think we're going to have a few more soon. So, and some pretty, I mean, for me, like having Carrion on the last one, Betty Hold, talking about her new book and assessment tool that they released, just goes to show that, Agitare is making its name, and it's a place, and there's people that are thanking the community for bringing this information out into public, and it being open forum, and there's no charge. I think that there's a unique aspect of it that I respect and am happy to contribute to. So, but yeah, anyway, that's me. I just thank you. It's I'm doing my own design work now, and I wouldn't have done that had I not joined this community. So definitely some
just design work, but design and futures work, which I'm really excited about. And I love that you're sharing the story of that. Like, that's enormous. That's one aspect of I work out loud, right? I just do. That's part of my process, and part of it is for other people, but most of it is for me, because when I work out loud, I get feedback, and also it helps me hone what I like. It's that old quote, how will I know what I think until I see what I say? As I'm composing things, I'm digesting them. So it helps me understand what I think about what just happened, or what I think about a topic. And then I also get the feedback element. So one of the cool things about having a community of practice is you have an audience. So it lowers the threshold. When I share about facilitation nerdy stuff on LinkedIn with a wide audience, I don't know how they're going to respond. They're not part of, a significant number of them are not part of my group, my language community. So I don't necessarily know that they're going to appreciate what I'm sharing, but I know that if I share something in the Agitare community, they're going to feel like it's relevant. They're going to feel like it's useful. They're going to feel compelled to respond. So it lowers the threshold for that storytelling, which is another element to that, how communities create feedback loops. I didn't want to talk too much more, but there's one thing I want to share. There's another thing I want to share here. So I hope that's okay. And it is, because it's very relevant, I'm going to go to this map that Austin Wiggins and I, unfortunately, Austin couldn't make it today. I told him I would say both good and bad things about him. So Austin is, the bad thing is that he's not here, and that's very disappointing. But Austin is just a significant collaborator in my life these days, a solid thinking partner. I actually wouldn't say this directly to him, but it brings to mind the Kahneman-Tversky thinking pairing that led to Daniel Kahneman's significant accomplishments as a behavioral economist. Having a thinking partner is pretty significant. And that's another reason why communities are powerful. So Austin and I have been doing a lot of work together at Air Force CyberWorks, where we facilitate these futures and design efforts. And we've done a number of workshops now where people are like, why don't we have more of this capability in the Air Force? How do we build more of you? They're like, they want these facilitation capabilities. They want somebody who can do design thinking, futures, design strategy workshops. So they ask us this question: how do we build more of you? What training do we need in the Air Force to get more of you? Tell us what the pipeline is. And I immediately was like, well, the pipeline starts with, take a really shy, introverted, sort of antisocial child, give them 10 years of classical flute training, get them into electronic music, have them do that for a number of years, and then start producing hip hop. Make sure that they're prolific writers of bad poetry, probably some heartbreaks, some significant trauma, right? Those are the kinds of things that you need in order to build one of me, because those are actually really significant elements of who I am and what I'm capable of. It's kind of a joke, but it's true. So Austin and I sat down and we were like, we're going to map what makes us, right? And we just started talking about, what things do we have? What makes us capable of doing the things that we do in workshops, to improvise in the ways that we can, to combine different frameworks into a workshop. Because it's definitely not that I went through Summer of Design, because I just pull some stuff from Summer of Design. Summer of Design is a great program, but the curriculum itself, in addition to offering a framework, it helped me build my curiosity, my experimental mindset. It helped me become more of a generalist, because as Karen Pettyhold describes in her new book, Experiencing Design, there are these elements of your character that kind of grow as part of the process. So practicing actually builds some of these characteristics. And what we came up with was this map. There are these characteristics which cannot be trained. You can't put somebody through an 8-week course to make them more curious, right? You could do things as an element of that course that might help incite curiosity, but you don't train a person to be curious. Curiosity is a developed characteristic. And it's nonlinear. It comes from a number of different angles, right? And it's experiential and it's complex. It's not curriculum, right? So there are characteristics which basically cannot be trained. They're developed over the decades. Then there are these competencies. You can become a better writer and communicator through deliberate practice, right? So we're competent at these practices of, like, decomposition is a significant aspect of what we do. The ability to look at a material and go, that's actually made up of a couple of different components. And if we pull those apart, we're going to be able to make much more sense of this. That happens constantly in facilitation, right? It's just, you frequently have to interact with people and help them come to alignment about what they're talking about by decomposing the content that they're generating. We also do a lot of design work in advance. We do, in futures work, you do scanning. We do ethnographic work in interviews and conversations with people, right? So those are competencies. Interviewing is a direct competency. This map, we also identified books that are associated with these competencies. I was talking to Jody about this beforehand, where we came up with competencies. We were like, oh, this is also important, and it's a competency. And then we also did this other thing, which is, what books do we think are important, and what does that mean about aspects of us? So we derived it both from the books that we had in common, or we, The Art of Gathering, it's amazing book. If you haven't read it, it's brilliant and wonderful for facilitation. Liminal thinking, right? That's really good for an understanding of visual thinking, of mapping, of how we have to deconflict beliefs, how we have to deconflict those rigid, intrinsic things that prevent us from seeing the same thing, right? Or from speaking the same language. Cognition and psychology come in. So those are examples of competencies, right? And then there are approaches. This is how we do what we do. And I incorporate significant amount of complexity thinking into the way that I design workshops. Futures thinking, systems thinking, right? Design thinking is an approach. It's one of some approaches. There's like design theory. You get into UX design. I'm really heavily. I recently ran a workshop that's almost like mostly a UX design process called task analysis, and I used it to deconflict existing feature sets of an application versus what they were trying to do with use cases. And it was a really great workshop. It was very successful. Okay. Innovation strategy, team of teams, seeing around corners is good stuff. We refer a lot back to measure what matters in organizational strategy. Community management, community design, social by design, I got from Brett. Follow Mark Britt's now on LinkedIn. And then most people, they just get approaches and frameworks. It's like, here's design thinking, here's a framework, journey mapping. You're gonna use journey mapping as part of your design thinking process. Frameworks can be taught in a matter of hours. I did a 3-day boot camp on Cynefin, but I learned it by just reading about it from blog posts. And then I had an understanding of how to apply it. Frameworks are the most accessible part of this, right? And most people only think the process is the framework. They're like, oh, you just need the steps. You just take the framework and you apply it. Oh, it's just strategic foresight. Let's do strategic foresight, right? We just have to figure out how they did it, and then we'll do it too. And what that doesn't account for is the fact that as a product, as a component of that futures workshop, you're going to have to do some decomposition with the participants. You're going to have to be creative. You're going to have to use your communication skills. You're going to have to use your gathering skills to hold space. You're going to have to be good at synthesis of the outputs because they came out very different than you expected them to. Okay. So there are these competencies and characteristics that augment the approaches that are constrained by the frameworks. The frameworks are really useful because they constrain the approach significantly, right? So I start with a framework or a couple of frameworks, and then I kind of go, how do I have to adapt this for the particular context? And a significant part of that involves doing ethnographic inquiry into the context in which I'm applying it, right? And then I go, I'm going to adapt it. I'm going to pull this from design thinking. I'm going to pull this from complexity theory. I'm going to introduce this from Cynefin, and it's a big soup, right? It's a gumbo. I wanted to share this map because I think it's really interesting from a perspective of what makes people competent at facilitation, design thinking, sense making, futures work. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to do was go, and then we talked about things that had nothing to do with us, but were an aspect of our environment. Things that had to be the case in order for these things to succeed. We need white space in order to actually put those competencies into play. We need top cover. We need creative control. We need a lot of opportunities to keep exploring more frameworks and more practices, right? And then also you need a team. Austin, like I would not be nearly as effective as I am if I didn't have Austin and the rest of the CyberWorks team augmenting, especially where I am not good. I'm not that good at event planning. I'm terrible at administrative tasks. I'm like really, really bad at them. I'm really bad at them. I like panic. When people tell me to like send an email to 6 people, and I'm like, how am I even going to do this? I can't, I don't know why, but it's just how my brain works. So, and then there's the network. And Austin brought up this thing called the Great Network Theory to me the other day. which is the counterpoint to the great man theory. It's that it actually aligns really well with some theories that I got from where good ideas come from, which is that good ideas emerge when the potential arises for them to emerge. You know, great inventions happen when there's a potentiation, sort of in a networked way, right? This is why you have simultaneous invention. Thing is invented here and then also here at the same time, even though they weren't interacting. It's because it entered the adjacent possible, right? Networks facilitate the adjacent possible. They facilitate the entering that state of potentiation. Individuals cannot create a state of potentiation. It has to be approached from multiple angles because it involves so many different elements. One individual can't make it all happen, right? You need the right technology, you need the attitude, you need the buy-in, you need the right group of people. There's all these elements of timing. There's a very complex, right? Reaching that state of potentiation requires a lot of different things. So that is to say, and this is why it's relevant to Agitare, that Agitare is largely responsible for our growth in the top 3 categories here. That is where we had the opportunity to hone those competencies, to grow those characteristics, and to learn new approaches, and to figure out how they connect to each other, and to see them in action by other practitioners. The network is a significant component of our capacity as individuals. That's not just because we can rely on outside collaborators. That is a component of it, but it's because we're getting constant serendipitous collision with new information that helps us red team our existing plan to augment our current thinking on things. So I belong to a number of communities, and I actually draw a lot of the material from the Conversation Factory Insiders, from the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum, from the Knevin community, from Map Camp, which is the Wordly mapping Slack. I'm a bit of a connector in that regard. I just pull information from a bunch of sources and I throw it all into Agitare, right? Which means that Agitare is itself a component of a larger network of communities. So that's just what I wanted to share, was that I had this sort of breakthrough of mapping the individual capacity as a function of collective capacity and enabled by those networked effects. And that felt really significant to me. So I just wanted to share it here today.
Daniel, I was going to throw out my mic on. I can never know if okay.
You're on.
Yeah, we got you.
I was going to throw out, I saw a post from Ian Eishen this morning on the Air Force Quarantine University, where he talked about they were wrapping up some time in France, and met with a bunch of different innovation organizations from industry and from like the French version of MIT. And he said one of their insights was how static organization structure, from my interpretation, static organization structure doesn't help you with complex adaptive situations. And he said, I think they kind of knew it going in, but it was interesting to see that translate across those communities they met with. And as I'm hearing this, listening to you talk about how you quickly build the scaffolding, build an adaptive organization, and then tear it down, and it's there. I sat in a discussion yesterday afternoon where I made the point that what I've seen over the last couple of years, especially through help from Agitare, is within the Air Force, within my unit, the airmen are there. You just have to reach out to them, build that trust, give them that safe space, whether you call it that or not, and help connect dots. That's one of my personal passions, is helping connect the dots between why they're coming in every day and what they're working on each day and what the output is. Being able to say, here's this combatant commander requirement, here is this task for a mission, and here's how you can contribute to it. And then if I get 6 of you together, and one of my commanders loves using the Voltron metaphor of, they all connect up and create the greater power entity, then they see that, and then that success, and then that feedback that comes back from that customer of, wow, I've been asking for this for years and somebody finally figured it out. It gets addictive. Success, there's that. I get tingly just talking about it, because it's pretty fantastic to watch it happen. and then let it go on autopilot. Let them run off and tear off and give them that room. I see it as like a network like Agitare has been for me, helping as a coping mechanism through that emotional roller coaster through design, and the remorse from self-agreements. You make these commitments that you're going to do something, and they talk about in negotiation ripeness and readiness for ideas. Sometimes it's just not ripe, it's just not ready. A big lesson from Karen Hold for me was applying grace, mostly against yourself or to yourself, but to others. That they're trying to get through things on their own, and recognizing it. Maybe it just wasn't the right time. That's okay. You can put it to the side for a minute. It's fine, or a month, or a year, or 10 years. And then the final piece, I think I got a kick on. I might have mentioned it. One of the previous things that helped me a lot was the art of getting things done. I saw the post about trying to get the panic of trying to write an APR. I had the panic of trying to write an after action report for a working group I went to a month ago over this past week, and I'm slaying forests in post-it notes, and I'll apologize to the planet, but just kind of recognizing and kind of applying that grace to myself of, I can't get there right now. Why can't I get there? Okay, what structure, one post-it note at a time. I want the first paragraph to cover this. I want the next, I need to cover these 6 topics, and just starting that motion, getting in some kind of motion, some kind of inertia, is really powerful. And you gave me the idea of the what I've read about is context shifting, doing things like I hydrate a lot. I drink a lot of water at work, partially to hydrate because it's healthy for you, but the other part is it forces me to get up and walk to go to the bathroom. So I'll finish with a task, and then that is my break, my context shifting event, is to go maybe have a couple conversations on the way to or on the way back, and then the catharsis of washing your hands, which has been a lot more of a focus item in the last couple of years, but using that as like the cathartic event of I am washing the old task away, and closing the door on that and going in fresh and clean for the next task, and having those things together. And that's all been, Agitare has contributed tremendously to helping me out with that. So I want to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think I got that water bottle thing from Daniel Pink's book When, which is great. He was like, you need to have a water bottle at your desk, not a giant one, so that you have to fill it up often, because the act of standing up and walking away from your desk is good for your brain. It kind of breaks you out of entrained thought, and then it also stirs up creativity. So now every time I see somebody with like a 5-gallon jug of water at their desk, I'm like, I think about that. The other thing that what you just said kind of stirs to mind for me is that there's something that we have to combat here within this space, and I have to combat it personally, is a sort of tribalism, and it is generally along the framework lines. CPI is a framework, right? It's a fixed set of methods that are standardized and pushed through curriculum. So I'd argue it's a bit of a fixed framework. They're trying to incorporating other things. Now it's CI2 or whatever it is. But they've now got a couple of frameworks. Thank you so much for joining us, Brett. It was really great to see you. One tendency that I've had as somebody who is like a proponent of particular methods is that I see other methods and I'm like, no, not that, do mine. It's a natural reaction to being like excited about your thing and how it deviates from the entrenched thing, right? But there's a real danger to thinking in terms of your I-Core clan. And I did this before with I was guilty of this with Michael Harbin, where I'd be like, I-Core is, I did I-Core. It sucks. It's terrible. What I've kind of grown into is that the frameworks flex, right? They are generally, or they should be, adaptive to the context. And they generally are in the hands of the right practitioner. So, you could say that one framework or another is better for a given context, but you can have people from different frameworks. Ideally, everybody should be cross-pollinating from various frameworks. They should have some competency in this one and that one so they can build the gumbo every time. But you can be fully bought into the, I-Core or think wrong or task analysis or wordly mapping or strategic foresight or whatever it is, design thinking, and still have all of the approaches, competencies, and characteristics that are elements of how you can grow each other and collaborate and learn from each other within a community of practice. So that's made me think, one of the funny things about Agitare is that we continue to kind of add like things onto what this is a community of practice for. We just recently added futures. It's now design thinking. I like to say sense making because it's a lot of it's about sense making and complexity, and futures. Those are kind of the approaches level, but I'm open to whatever your approach is. Now we got people from design warfare in there, which I'd say is a sort of a mashup of some design thinking practices, some methods from I-Core, lean startup, I-Core, and hacking for defense. That was one of the major origins of design warfare, right? And I want Agitare to be a space for whoever is applying whatever framework to find opportunities for cross-pollination and to grow as facilitators with similar approaches, competencies, and characteristics, regardless of what framework you're using. Because those characteristics, competencies, and approaches are where the rubber meets the road, right? That's where it really matters, is the individual competencies and the networked competencies of who you're bringing in, right? So there's this tendency, I just kind of want to recognize it. When people start talking about different methods, I immediately go, this is better than that, is better than that, is better than that. It's a normal response, but I think it's harmful. I actually think it's better to go, hey, what if we put this on top of that? And then they're both there. That can still be your favorite. This can be my favorite. And we can just have a conversation about, we're going to step outside of those frameworks anyways, because they're too rigid to apply the same way every time. So, yes, and thinking, exactly.
Yeah. Chris, you mentioned that, Karen said, give each other grace. And there was a lot of intentional thought into the beginning of Agitare, in terms of, what is this community is, what isn't, what do we want it to feel like? And I think that idea of grace was one of those that kind of we wanted from the beginning, to be very welcoming and inclusive. One of our core values is demand inclusivity. And so I think, giving people grace is one of those. And, Daniel, I love the fact that you brought up, I-Core, so he went through I-Core. I teach I-Core. I still teach it today. It's very, introductory 2-day class on lean startup principles. And in the early days of Agitare, yes, Daniel was like, let's brush off I-Core. Like, let's move on. Let's do other cooler things that are, are better. But I have seen him do that turnaround to where now it's, it was listed on that map that he just shared, of what does it take to kind of help build facilitators and practitioners, I just love the fact that we definitely, I think, around here give each other grace and support. And it's fantastic. One of my favorite channels in the Slack is sessions. When anyone posts in sessions, I get excited. I'm like, oh, I got to read this. Like, this is it. Daniel posts all the time, all over the place, which is fantastic. I love having the resources and like the learning, and I just don't have time for futures, right? Which is kind of like a little, odd thing to say, but I've got so much going on that I can't read everything Daniel posts, but anyone posts in sessions, I'm all over it. I'm like, I have to read this. I have to know what's going on because I love the workshop facilitation aspect. And so, I jump all over that. And I think I've gained a lot of value from that sessions channel. Not just, me sharing ideas and getting feedback, but really just seeing what other people are doing, especially what Cuss is currently working on, his like huge grand project that he's doing 3 phases of. He's shared a lot of, the agenda and the design behind it, but also, images of what's going on in the workshops. So I love those. It's great to see how are people reacting to this type of stuff. And I think there's a lot of grace given in that channel as well. People post things and no one jumps in there saying like, well, that is not going to work after that. You can't do those exercises back to back. And it's like, well, I don't know. I'm not there and I'm not you. I don't have the same competencies or characteristics that you do. And it might work really well for you in that setting. So it's just really fun. I love that channel.
Yeah, that whole me getting less hubristic about my chosen frameworks thing has been a direct result of participating actively with this community. My ability to figure out that I was, being a little bit egotistical about, wanting to say one methodology was better than another. And I honestly think that it's something that a lot of us fall into, but I think that the only way, like a lot of, like most biases, like most, prejudices, a pretty quick cure is just to expose people to people who are actively engaged in it. I hated on CPI a lot, and then I met some CPI facilitators that I was like, that person knows what they're doing. Like, and my cartoon straw man version of CPI melted away as a result of that. It's really easy to hate things that you don't have a lot of direct exposure to, which is why we need more opportunities to cross-pollinate between these, tribes of approaches. I get a ton out of, I-Core and Lean Startup. And that's something I realized. I was like, I talk a lot of trash. It's just a product of talking a lot, right? And I have to, I have to catch myself sometimes. But the ability to have seen what I said and how it reflected off of other people is a product of being a part of a community and a network, right?
But thinking about the growth of Agitare, there was a lot of energy, I would say, in the early days, right? And there was really like those core members. And yes, there have been low periods in the Slack. There's been low engagement periods on some of the fish bowls even that Cuss did. But I think, today, I really like where we are. We have got some of the original Agitare founders, right? Like here today, and we've got new folks that are here as well. So like, I really love the, I think it's kind of a healthy community, right? We don't have people that just come for a short time and then leave and never come back. We definitely have people that stay, but we have new people that are being drawn in and adding value to the community as well. So
yeah,
Agitare, the last 2 years has been an amazing journey.
Yeah, pretty great.
I would just like to say good night. Well, here is the, the end of the day. And I don't feel that I'm part of your community, but I feel, because I'm not Air Force, I'm not American, I don't, actually, if I look at you all, I wonder what I'm doing here. But I know why I'm here, because what you have built, Daniel, is really amazing. It's basically high quality everything, high quality successes, high quality failures, high quality thinking, high quality reading, high quality human interactions. I just love following you, and I learn a lot from you. Well, okay, I'm a design thinking person as well, so I understand what you're doing. But I just, the first time I saw the fishbowl advertised in LinkedIn, I asked you, can I come in? He said, yes, of course. I was almost stressed to join the fishbowl. I thought, who are they? Are they going to accept me? And it was extremely nice, like warm arms around me. And just thank you for this. And hope you have many more anniversaries. And I congratulate you for the work you do.
Thank you so much, Brigitte. I absolutely consider you a part of this community. If I was to list off members of the community, I see you regularly. We interact a lot, right, around work that you're doing. You and I had an interaction with Toga about how you were going to use the CliFi stuff, which was so exciting to see you do that in an educational context. That's amazing, right? So
I did it with 120 people in the conference.
Incredible.
It was such a risk taking. I was betting my life on this, and then it worked. But you helped me a lot as well. You were the last testers. You and Toga.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you all. I leave you now. Au revoir.
Au revoir. All right. We have hit our hour, and I do want to share the video of this just for anybody who, we have a video on the Agitare webpage that's like just my initial pitch. And I kind of thought it would be cool to replace that just with whatever we did during this event. So if people wanted to find out what Agitare was about, they could sit and listen to it from a couple of perspectives, right? I do kind of like that it's a little bit mysterious before people jump in. It's not entirely clear, you know, what we do. Maybe we should fix the website, but I do kind of like, you know, it says like become a guide through the landscape of ideas or something, the copy that Jordan did. And I kind of like that. It's, you know, it's vague. It's and that's fitting with the whole rapidly building scaffolding and then taking it down and then building what we need next, right? I really like that. So thank you all for joining us today on a Saturday. Jordan, I don't know if you're still here, but it was wonderful to see you all.
I'm still here. I'm just munching on some hash browns.
Oh, yum. I want hash browns.
They're really good.
Oh, man. All right. I'm going to call it. Thank you all. We will see you on Slack and at the next event. And please reach out to me personally if you have any questions or concerns or want to, you know, do something crazy with the community, because I'm always up for that.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Dan. It's good to see everybody.
Thank you, Daniel.
Great to see you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.